Okay, well, thanks for staying on for the hands-on study group. Let me go ahead and share. No, I'm still sharing, right? Yeah, I'm still sharing. So let me bring up my study guide here. And for those of you, well, let me ask real quick. Is anybody joining this study group for the first time? Because I can do a quick walkthrough of how you get a lab and all that kind of stuff scheduled. If you are joining for the first time, just give me a thumbs up. Okay, well then I'll go ahead and get straight into it. So today we're going to talk about filter plugins. So I have a couple examples, not too much stuff because I kind of wanted to keep it simple since this is the first time around of introducing this particular topic. But over time, I'm going to circle back and add like more advanced filter plugins and other types of plugins as we go through. So let me go ahead and get down to further down in the study guide. And I do have a table of contents that I just remembered too. I should have did that, huh? So we're starting. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Yeah, from here. So this is section 9. So filters or filter plugins. If you do need to set something up, if you're watching this recording and you haven't set up a lab before, you can click on March 17, and it gives you like all the steps of using the Cisco sandbox. Um, in particular, the CML sandbox, and then there's a script that you run to get your Ansible up to speed on their jump box. And then once all that's done, and you have your topology imported into the CML, then you can run automation against it. And those environments last for 4 hours. So you can normally get through, quite a few sections if you're like starting from the beginning or whatever. And eventually you'll catch back up to where we are. So we're going to look at filters today. And I mentioned there's tons of filters. So this link goes through tons of them. So if you, I really encourage you to take a look at this and read this at some point. And filters are very powerful, in Ansible automation. So it really is one of the topics that you really should spend some time on. And it offers a lot of value because, like today, we were manipulating data, using the Jinja 2 templates. And you notice that, like, I was doing some parsing, and in some of them, I do have some filters. So when you get into like data manipulation, the filters make it a lot easier to accomplish a lot of that stuff. So from a lab perspective, what I wanted to do is I'm going to use some files that were created in a previous lab to get started. And then we're going to look at how, we can use filters for our variables and also filters for loops as well, which kind of go hand in hand. If we have to iterate through multiple of, whatever the object is, then sometimes it makes sense to filter, what we're pulling in for a loop, as an example. So in this first one here, I'm just going to talk through this real quickly. This particular file is called interfaces.yaml. And I have access to that because I've already went through, and this is what like that setup script looks like. And it's created my project directory. So it's very important because if you go through these labs, if you don't save your work to your my project repo, and the lab guide will show you how to set all that stuff up. It's very important because as you're making progress and going through these labs, you can save your work. And then that way, when we use files later on that we created earlier, then you still have access to them and you don't have to keep, recreating content as you go through the lab guide. And again, like these lab environments are temporary, so there's no way to save them, there. So we save everything into a GitLab repo. So in this particular one, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to it. Oh, I lost my, I still have my VPN. I just need to create another prompt. It was sitting there so long. The cool thing about the DevNet environment is that it doesn't change. So the usernames and IP addresses are always the same once you connect through your VPN. So that should be the jump box. All right, so in the jump box, this is the repo that the study guide tells you to pull down and has some files and things in it. This is the one that I'm talking about that you'll create that that will be your files that you'll want to save. So I'm going to change directories into my project. Right, and then I have all these different files from previous labs and so on. So the one that I was talking about was in group vars. and it's the disk switches, which are Nexus, virtual Nexus switches. And it's called interfaces.yaml. So here, this is the name of the file, but then we've created this dictionary of list elements, right? And its name is interfaces. So we can have access to this from our playbook because Ansible will look. And if you attended the first section, the demo that I went through, I'm assuming everyone did. You'll note that I mentioned that there's different places where you can find variables. We were looking at host vars. This particular one is in group vars, so it would apply to all of my distribution switches, right? So each one of them, if I have like a particular, port connectivity model that I'm using, a convention, then if they all use like the same, uplink ports and all that kind of stuff, then those configs could be at the group level because it's the same, for each one of the switches. And we're not talking about something that's very specific to these particular hosts because we're not talking about IP addressing. We're just talking about the interfaces names and their descriptions. So in this example, that's what we're going to use is this file in our group vars. So the next part about this is creating a playbook. So in this playbook, what I want to do is effectively, I want to start automating some of my troubleshooting. So this is just an easy example of show interface brief, but I want to call out the interface by its name. So I have a variable placeholder for that here. And because we have multiple interfaces, you can see that I'm going to iterate through them with a loop. So this loop points to interfaces, and that dictionary was named interfaces in the interface.yaml file that's in the group var. So Ansible will find that there. And then I can iterate through it using item, or if I needed to, I could go into loop vars and create a different naming for the item. So I'm just using default item here, right? Because we just only have the one loop in this playbook anyway. So we have item and then name. So the name of the interface. So when we run this, we want to print out the output on the screen. So we're going to loop through that output. Right, and we should see that output, for each one of those interfaces. It should show us its, its brief IP interface configuration. So this playbook does not exist, so I'm not going to type all this stuff. So to save time, I'm just going to copy it over. Well, that didn't save time. I went to the dang top of the lab guide. Hopefully that's not giving you a headache. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Right here. All right, so now that I have that, I'll go ahead and add that playbook. And the name of that playbook was show interface underscore br.yaml. All right, so everything looks like it's still maintained its indentation, so that's good. And then I'll go ahead and save that. And then we'll run it. So I already have like an Ansible.cfg file that is stating where the path is to the inventory. So there's no need to worry about that. Right, and output's a little funky. I have to mess with my terminal, but this is the standard output lines, from each one of those. So you can see, let me scroll to the top. So like the first one is management for, we have for two switches, disk 2 and disk 1. So when you look at the output, you can see which switch. So this is disk switch 2. This is the management port here. And then it's scrolling down to the Ethernet 1. And you can see it's just working its way down. So each one of those iterates through and has an output. And because we're working with the, in this case, it's just a standard output, then then we have to worry about like the screen positions and things like that. and how we want to look. So that's another reason why I'm a fan of structured data, so that we have a cleaner output. We could actually have a YAML output or a JSON, that type of thing. So this is just a real quick and dirty example for that one. So we understand that we were able to get to that variable because it was in our group vars, and then we iterate it through the loop, right? So we're going to build on what we saw here. So the next thing that we're going to do is, and this is just the output of running that playbook, is we're going to create a second playbook. But this time we're going to use a filter, because in that example, we had those variables defined in group vars. But what if we didn't have our variables defined somewhere? So maybe we intend on using extra vars, right? So when we run the playbook command, we could actually um, go through and have an option for the extra variables, right? So we could dash E and then point it to an extra variable, or maybe we're reading in environment variables, right, with export commands, or there's a lot of different things that could happen. But if we do that, or if we forget to populate a variable, then that playbook would fail. So sometimes we may want to use a filter for a default um, configuration, right? So interface this time, right? So here we have our variable defined here for show interface. So we're naming it interface, and then we're using a filter. So a filter is delineated with the pipe, right? So here we're saying that if we don't find the interface variable, then we can fall back to this default variable of eth1/1. So the eth1/1 would be the output of our show interface eth/1/1 brief, right? So it's really just like a fallback default option. Sometimes you may forget a variable and you may omit it, but it depends on, like when we're talking about router commands, then if it doesn't receive a proper command, then you'll have a syntax error will come back from the device. So here we want to send it something. So if we don't want this particular task to fail, then if the variable is not found, then we can populate it with this particular default configuration, right? So this one will go ahead and create this playbook. And this one is called the same thing, but just 2, right? Escape. Change it to 2. All right, so this time all we have is the Ethernet 1/1 for both of the switches that are in the dist switch group. And just in case, um, the inventory itself, we didn't look at it. I mentioned that the Ansible.config file is pointing to the inventory, but we do have the inventory here from a previous lab. So that is inventory.yaml file. And the one that we were looking at is this one here, the dist switch, or SW, right? And those 2 switches that are in the CML environment from Cisco are in there. And just in case anyone hasn't seen this before, just for a frame of reference, it's always 10.10.20.161 is the address of CML in those sandboxes. See if I can get it the right size. Here. And this is the topology that we use. We have 2 disk switches. That's what we're talking about today, or that we're interacting with today and automating. And then we have 2 disk routers and then 1 core router up here. So just for a frame of reference, that's what we're actually connecting to. And if we need to, if something fails, then the cool thing about this is you can actually go into a console on these. And all this stuff is free. It's just on the Cisco DevNet. The password Cisco. for user and password Cisco, right? So we did the show IP int eth1/1 brief. What am I doing wrong here? Oh, show interface, not IP interface. All right, so that's the equivalent of what we were doing in the playbook. So back to the playbook, or that was the inventory. I'm sorry. So back to the guide. All right, so I created this playbook, but we didn't. Oh, we did run it. That's right. We looked at the output. Yeah, so that was the output for that one. So now what we want to do is create another file in our group bars. So in this one, I'm creating some commands that I want to run, but it's really two lists, right? So I have required commands and I have optional commands, right? So these I want to run every time. And then these are optional. So it's a second list of commands that I only run like for certain situations. So let's go ahead and create this file. And I need to go back into our group bars. Dist switch. And I think I called it commands, right? Let me check. Yeah, commands.yaml. All right, so we got these two lists. Save them. All right, so we have these two lists. So this first playbook I'm going to run, I'm going to call it commands.yaml, but it's a playbook this time. And I'm going to only look at the required commands, right? And then have an output of those on the screen. So this is pretty straightforward. Commands.yaml. All right, so we only should see the required commands. Ooh, what we got going on here? Oh, that shouldn't be there. That command, I forgot to save that. That shouldn't be there because it's not a valid command for a Nexus. So that was this one here. So I have to remove that from here. And then run the playbook again. And we'll get a bunch of output. Okay, so that was from the required commands, and then you guess it, the next one will just be the optional commands. So let me scroll down to that one. And we'll call this the commands2 YAML playbook. And then the filter will be the next one, right, to prove the point. So vim commands2. All right, so there's our two optional commands and with their output. And then the last one is where the filter comes into play. So in this filter, what I want to do is I want to combine two lists together. So I have my required commands, and then I want to use this filter. So I have the pipe, and I'm using the union filter. So it's going to take my optional commands list and combine it with required commands. So I'm using this for a loop, right? So this is where we're pulling in the information for the loop, just like we did before, but we were only calling one at a time. An alternative to this, I could have did a set fact and then combined them together and then could have called that from the loop. But you can also use these filters in a loop. So I wanted to show that. So we'll go ahead and create this third playbook. All right. All right, so it went through that entire both lists together, unified, or through the union filter, and then this is all the output, which is a lot. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to cover for these filters. And again, there's a lot of filters, so I'm going to circle back. Not the next session, but like we'll go through these as we get a little bit more advanced and more advanced. We'll go through more advanced filters, but these are just some of the basic filters and some examples. So I mentioned too, don't forget to save your work. So I'm going to do that real quick. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I think this was already done earlier in my script, but just in case, so I don't see that warning pop up, put my username in here for my GitLab. And then the next part of this is I want to, also this email doesn't really matter. You can put anything for the email. It doesn't matter. But I'm just going to paste these in here because I want to save all of the config or all the files that we've configured, right? So I'm going to just use this all argument. So add them into my local repo, and then I'm going to commit them to say like these are the committed changes. So I'm done in my local repo, and then the push will push to the GitLab repo. So get these in here. These are all the files that we created. Remember commands 2 and 3, and then we've got the show interface ones we did, and that commands.yaml file that we created in our group vars. So that's all the stuff that we did today. And then when I hit push, it's going to ask me again for my username anyway. And right, and then now I have updated my file. So the next time when I go to the next lab that I create, I'll have all the previous files, and I can work from everything that I built on up into this point. So git status will say that everything's good and up to date here, right? So I'm all good. So that's all I had today. I'm going to go ahead and just stop real quick in case there was somebody who wanted to join, but I didn't notice that. They're probably not even around anymore. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. I didn't hear their, the beep go off. But anyway, guys, thanks for joining. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to shout out now. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and shut this thing off.
Nope. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you. Thanks for joining. All right. Well, have a great rest of your day. Go ahead and stop all this.
Yeah.
Stop the recording. Stop.